What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. We got Jays Jumpers, Jaron Jackson Jr.'s, John Morant's, Joe Johnson's, Jaw Raffs, of course. We've got Jays. We got him for days. Josh, how you doing?
I realized as I was preparing that I basically just took the storylines from last season for the Big East and then just adjusted them for this season. I thought that was interesting. I looked at them because I, basically make a copy of last year's and then change it. And I went, well, those pretty much just line up, so we're going to use them again.
Sure. I like it. I like it. Day 2, week 2 of college basketball preview season. If you missed the first episode, we did the ACC last week. 2023-24 season preview on that conference. If you were here last year, you know that we typically did a preview with Josh and I, followed by a conversation with someone who covers a team in the conference or the conference as a whole. This year, those two things are separate, so there will be a 6-week chunk of previews with Josh and I, followed by a 6-week chunk of conversations with college basketball media people and those who cover the conferences, the high major conferences. So those still coming later, but for right now, just conversations between Josh and I. Same structure as last season, as Josh kind of alluded to, breaking down the conferences in a efficient but also as widespread of a way as possible. And the way we do that is through 5 different categories. The team you are most excited for, the team that you are most intrigued by, storylines of that conference, teams that could make the NCAA tournament, and then of course a winner. Anything else we need to touch on before we get started, Josh?
Let's jump in.
Josh, 2023-24, Big East. Which team are you most excited for?
I mean, it's Marquette. To me, there's no other answer here.
Wow, 2.5 minutes in, and you're already implying insult on the team I'm most excited for. That's interesting.
I'm curious.
It's a bold strategy.
I'm curious to see who this is. And part of this is just me loving Shaka Smart and what's going on at Marquette. Part of this is obviously you're returning a top 10 team in the country, every important piece except for Olivia Maxine's Prosper. You had a couple top 100-ish recruits who we'll see how much they actually get on the floor with everybody that's coming back. And the other part of this is I want to see how good this team can be. I want to see what this team learned from last season. Can they elevate to another level? Because they're obviously going to be probably top 5 preseason. The idea of Marquette potentially winning a national championship is super, super exciting to me. And I just love everything that's going on with this, so I didn't have to think hard about it at all.
See, this is fun because I think you and everybody else in the country is going to underestimate Max Prosper not being there. I think everybody will. He is an unbelievably hard player to replace. Mm-hmm. From his versatility to the fact, it's not just his versatility is rebounding. His versatility on both ends of the floor, but especially on the defensive end. Guys are like the guys coming back at Marquette will have to be. Some of them will have to be better than they were last year for Marquette to be as good as they were last year, in my opinion.
Or somebody else has to step in and fill that role. You need something to. Yes, I agree with that. Mm-hmm.
I think that's an incredibly hard person to. I think that's a super hard person to try to replace. Not to say that I don't think they can replace that person, but I'm curious about that. And the other part of it is it's not Villanova on the back end of their 3rd straight year dominating the Big East. Is Tyler Kolek really that excellent? I think he is, but did he was he just insanely good last year and will just be really good this year? Um, this is not a conference that has seen anybody control it other than Villanova, really ever. And that'll be something that we talk about when we get to the winner of this conference. But I I think they're gonna. I think they'll probably be top five preseason. They'll probably be the Big East preseason champion, and they're going to be really good. I just don't think it's going to be I just don't think it's a foregone conclusion. They're as good as they were last year, and these are all reasons. These are not reasons to not be excited about them. These are just reasons that um, that maybe they weren't put into that category immediately for me.
And to me, that's what some of the excitement
Sure.
is this idea of, can they back it up? Can they do what they did last season, and can they elevate it? Because like
Mhm.
you said, we haven't seen anybody put together back-to-back seasons where you control this conference the way that Marquette did last season outside of Villanova. Yeah, so I'm with you that I'm not, crowning them national champions or anything. I have some question marks, but to me, that's part of the excitement. Is now you have the attention because of what you did last season, catching everybody off guard. I mean, I didn't even have as a tournament team, and I
Mhm.
would guess you probably didn't either. Although I don't remember that for sure.
Yeah, I don't remember. They probably would have been in my could make the NCAA tournament list, but only because it was a possibility rather
Yeah, and
than a surefire lock.
I didn't even have them there because I
Really
looked and what.
interesting.
Yeah, obviously we're talking about a very different context, so that's I agree with you, and that to me is part of the excitement of this is how do they follow it up? What can they
Hmm.
do? Can they take it to the next level?
Yeah, that was one of the things I had in my storylines for this conference is what does Marquette's encore look like? Um, it could be spectacular. I also am hesitant to see dominance as a foregone conclusion from a team that dominated out of absolutely nowhere the year before,
Hmm.
which may be a little unfair, but is just the way that I operate.
In a conference where a different team won the national championship.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. The team I'm most excited for is Creighton, and
Hmm.
this begins and ends in a backcourt that has Stephen Ashworth and Baylor Shireman. Like that's just how fun that's going to be. Um, it's crazy, and there was a lot that went on with Creighton last year, but they finished the season. They went to the Elite Eight last year, and they finished the season with a worse record than they did 2 years ago. They lost more games last year, which is really because 2 years ago it was the man. Look at what Greg McDermott did with this defensive team that had no offense and put together a really fun season. And of course, they would have been better if Kalkbrenner didn't miss whatever 6 or 7 games, whatever it was in that downward slide. But I actually think here's a couple reasons why I'm excited about Creighton this year. One, I think for my money, it's the best. It's the best coach talent combination in the conference this year. For my money, um, I think Baylor Shireman was good, not great last
Hmm.
year. I think there's a very real step forward that he could take, and as much as really like Ryan Nimhard as a college point guard, I think Stephen Ashworth might give Creighton a chance to be like really special offensively with those two guys in the backcourt and still not have to worry about the defensive end as much just because of how good Ryan Kalkbrenner is defensively. Because you can get away with not being as good defensively in the backcourt. And there's some other things that you no longer have this year that are important. But outside of you get three of your top scorers back from last year, four of your top six, and one of those you replaced with Stephen Ashworth. Um, I just think I don't know. I think they're probably a little. I think last year was about as poorly as that season could have gone from a seed perspective, from a record perspective, from a we were never in the Big East regular season conversation perspective. And I don't know. I think there's a very real chance that they're super, super fun on the offensive end, that they have the best player on the defensive end, certainly in the Big East, if not in the entire country. And that they might be a little bit disappointed from last year. And then you add, when you look at that tournament run, it's not that impressive. Like, yes, they went to the Elite Eight, but they beat NC State in the first round, a incredibly flawed Baylor team in the second round, and then Princeton in the Sweet 16, and then lost to San Diego State. So it's not like they beat a bunch of incredible teams on the way there and then lost to a team that they were clearly not better than in the Elite Eight. I'm just excited about it, and I'm really pumped to watch. I think their backcourt could be like absolutely electric. Like they could combine for 60 at one point this year, and that would be awesome. So I'm very excited for them, and we'll get to this in a storyline that I have, but they're so different from Marquette, and to see those two teams both be capable of winning this conference, and then you throw a couple other teams in there as well that, if things go right, could win this conference as well. I think it could be really fun, but I'm super pumped for the Blue Jays.
Yeah, the thing that I'm really curious about with this team is what you alluded to. This feels like Creighton teams of years past with the electric offense.
Sure.
And then you throw in a defensive behemoth in Ryan Kalkbrenner.
Right.
Can they be good enough defensively, because you are sacrificing some stuff on the perimeter to get all of these offensive weapons? Now, if you're scoring 80 points a game, obviously you don't have to be spectacular defensively. And there's certainly an argument to be made that Ryan Kalkbrenner by himself makes you good enough defensively to compete for a regular season title in the Big East, to compete for a national championship. Yeah, so I'm right there with you. I think they could be absolutely electric as well. I feel like they're going to be much more fun to watch. Whether that's better or not, to be determined. You know how I felt about last year's team, and I feel like ultimately I was justified in that, despite all of the games they lost. But also, like you said, if this starts well, and there aren't the injuries, and Stephen Ashworth comes in, and all of a sudden he and Baylor Shireman and Trey Alexander have figured out how to work together from the get-go, we're talking about a team that's going to be top 15, top 10 all season long. Yeah, so I'm very excited for this contrast. I think this is going to be a throwback Creighton team. What that means, we'll have to see, and how do they stack up defensively and all that. Just how good are they offensively? But aesthetically, this should be a much more entertaining
Marcus
team.
Zagorowski, Mitch Blaylock kind of team. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's gonna be super fun, super fun. So that's the team I'm most excited for. You are most intrigued by?
Also, not difficult for me, Villanova.
Okay. This is the other correct answer. I mean, I have the correct answer, but this is the other correct answer.
The other correct answer. Okay. For a variety of reasons. One, obviously what happened last season. You've got injuries in there, new head coach, post Jay Wright era begins. There was a lot going on, and obviously they weren't good. Then you throw in your quartet of transfers, TJ Bamba, Tyler Burton, Hakeem Hartlands, where you've got Eric Dixon, some role players back. I
Justin
remember
Moore.
Yeah, right. What does Justin Moore end up being able to give you? We talked about in the preview last season of Mark Armstrong is going to be the guy with the keys to this offense, and that is not exactly how things turned out. Can he step into that role in year two? There were just, how good of a coach is Kyle Neptune? Because the talent is there. You can say there were just some weird circumstances year one. He's learning, kind of like John Shire at Duke, right? Took him a while to figure it out. They weren't as good as they were supposed to be, but also you came away feeling good about John Shire ultimately in the end. maybe not quite that way with Kyle Neptune, but also Villanova got better as the season went along. There was clear growth and progress, and obviously Cam Whitmore being healthy had something to do with that. There's an awful lot of talent here, and there's an awful lot of guys who have played an awful lot of college basketball.
Mm-hmm.
Where this could be one of those teams that you're just putting all these pieces together. If they can make it work, it could look like a well-oiled machine from the very beginning because of the Villanova foundation and all of this experience that these guys are bringing in. This could be a really quick turnaround where you, within a couple weeks of the season starting, kind of forget all about last season and go, oh, this looks like Villanova again.
Yeah, there's a ton here that I also wanted to hit on. And this was another thing that fell into my storylines category but the headline for me was, is Kyle Neptune a good Big East basketball coach? Because we don't know yet.
Mm-hmm.
And while a lot was going on last year, right? You had Justin Moore's injuries, Cam Whitmore's injuries, Chris Arcidiacono, bless his heart, is not a high major starting point guard. He's just not. And any basketball team that any high major basketball team that he's the starting point guard on, that was the biggest issue with Mark Armstrong not being the guy at the point guard position last year, was that it had to be Chris Arcidiacono. And he's just not that good. He's just not. He's not his brother, and he's not anywhere close to what his brother was at Villanova. And if that's the case this year, there's still a very real ceiling on this Villanova team. That is the single most important. Like Tyler Burton, TJ Bamba, Lance Ware, we can be as spectacular as we want to be, but it's going to be dicey if Chris Arcidiacono is your starting point guard. It just is. And so that's option. That's thing number one I'm looking at. And even with all of that said, I still felt like Kyle Neptune was a little disappointing last year. And that's okay. It's year one. There was a lot of things going on, as you alluded to. But it's not like I'm confident in his long-term staying power at Villanova after year one. And that can be a thing even if your record doesn't look super sexy. Mm-hmm. That can still be a thing. And I'm not sold on that after 1 year, which is fine. I don't need to be sold on that after 1 year. And Villanova doesn't need to be sold on that after 1 year. The only other thing I'm super curious about is like this isn't the way that great Villanova teams are built. And maybe it just will never be the way that another great college basketball team is built ever again because of the way the transfer portal works and the age of NIL. But like the best basketball teams that Villanova has ever had, it's some really high level freshmen like Amari Spellman, but then it's Eric Paschal and Jalen Brunson and Mike Bridges and Dante DiVincenzo, all guys who have been in the program for multiple years.
And maybe a transfer thrown in as a secondary wing or something like that, a Caleb Daniels kind of player.
And like probably the most important player on this team this year will not have played in a Villanova uniform last year. Like possibly it's either Justin Moore or somebody else, because if Eric Dixon is the best player on this team, we've got an issue, because he was probably the best player on the team last year on a team that wasn't very good. So super intriguing basketball team that, for all of those reasons, it's a really interesting era of Villanova basketball, because it's just not the foregone conclusion at this point that it was for 20 years under Jay Wright. And that's just that opens a lot of questions that I feel like we haven't asked about Villanova in a long time.
And at the same time, the talent is there.
Absolutely.
Going to your Kyle Neptune point, it's not like you get 3 years to go build the team you want and then you start evaluating.
Right.
Because this team,
a la Marquette.
Right. And
meaning how fast Shaka Smart went and turned around Marquette.
Right. And even that team, I mean, he would have gotten time because he built that. And
yeah, but you're not But the 4-year recruiting cycle, that's how much time you get, is definitely not a thing anymore.
Right. And you could also flip that and say, well, that's on Shaka Smart. If he's not getting the individual improvement he needs, you got to fix that through the transfer portal.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You're making an intentional choice to not use the transfer portal.
Right.
So, but the point being, and I'm sure we'll get to Ed Cooley later on. We made this point when he moved to Georgetown. It's just not that hard to turn your roster over from 1 year to the next.
Mm-hmm.
So the talent is there. So we're going to see if, again, assuming there aren't any weird external circumstances here, if Kyle Neptune can coach and if this team lives up to its potential. Because if
Right.
it does, now you feel much better about him as the coach of Villanova moving forward. But if it's another bad season, it's not like you can just blame the talent
Mm-hmm.
and the players. Because, like you said, we should not be talking about Eric Dixon as the foundational piece of this team and the only guy that's kind of consistently there giving you 15 points a game.
Right. Absolutely. I'm most intrigued by the Huskies of Connecticut, of Connecticut. I I've never been so simultaneously convinced of the talent and curious about the same roster. But you're also not getting back either of your top 2 scorers.
Right.
And it's not like it was you had 4 guys averaging between like 14 and 12 and a half. You had Adama Sanogo and Jordan Hawkins, who you've both lost, combining for 33, 10, and 3. And the next closest guy is Tristan Newton. And the only other guy in double figures last year at 10 points. And it was like 10, 4.5, and 4.5. Anyways. So it's not really that simple as you are bringing back 6 of your top 8 scorers from a national championship team. And then so you start there. Right, you start with the most outstanding player in a Final Four, another guy that got drafted in the 2023 NBA draft, but then I have so many questions. Questions like, is Donovan Clingan just as effective in a main big man role as he is playing second string guys for 8 minutes because Adama Sanogo is just so good, and the 2 of them didn't play on the floor together, right? Is he the same? Does he have the same affection? That's not the same effect. Does he have the same effect as he did last season? He should be spectacular. How much? Because you being spectacular for 11 minutes a game and you being spectacular for 26 minutes a game are 2 very different things, especially for a guy who's 7'2". Is he going to be healthy the entire season? Talking about Creighton, that's a team who was very reliant on a 7-footer when it came to the things that they did. And it's just not that difficult for a 7-footer to step on somebody's foot, to have some sort of issue there. You have a backcourt that's right. Tristan Newton is there. You bring in Cam Spencer from Rutgers, which is also super intriguing. But then you have 2 more shooting guards in your recruiting class in Solomon Ball and Stephon Castle. How do those pieces fit together? Of course, Tristan Newton is kind of the guy with the keys, but this other conglomerate of guards around him, how does that kind of work out? Do you find a way to... Right, because in the NCAA tournament, it was, man, they figured out how to use Andre Jackson Jr. And now you kind of have to figure out how to use him in this among these new players. How good are your incoming freshmen? Right, I mean, like, they're the 4th best recruiting class in the country. They still only have 1 of the top 40 recruits in the class. And as you and I both know, not all freshmen are created equal. And not even like the 8th best and the 17th best are created equal, much less the 9th and the 41st. I have so many questions, and it could go all the way from, you know what, UConn's freshmen weren't that great, And while a Newton, Klingon, Jackson, Cam Spencer core basketball team is a good college basketball team, it's probably not a great one. And if your freshmen aren't super productive, then you've got some holes that I don't think you have the tools to fill. Um, but if your freshmen are awesome, we could be talking about another top 5 team. If Klingon's awesome, you can be talking about a guy that could be the Big East player. There's just, I think the variance for a team that just won the national championship and has so many pieces of that national championship team coming back, just from a percentage perspective, is super intriguing. I'm fascinated by the talent I see on this roster and my curiosity that comes from it at the same time.
Yeah, and I pulled up the numbers last season because I do have a mental hurdle just kind of carrying last season over. So Sonogo averaged 17.2, Hawkins averaged 16.2. Obviously,
Yeah.
they're both gone. Then you've got your trio of Caravan, Klingon, and Newton. Not in that order. I missed Newton. Newton was, like you said, 10. Caravan was 9. And now you're talking about Donovan Klingon at 7.
Mm-hmm.
The next 3 guys are gone too. Yeah, so I'm right there with you that obviously the way that this is getting replaced is Cam Spencer plus your recruiting class. That has, right, 3 guys. You can throw Jalen Stewart in there too. That are going to probably be big contributors because this team needs to make up all of these minutes. And it's weird because you and I think, are in agreement that you can't just look at Andre Jackson's numbers and say, oh, that's easy to replace. So I'm right there with you, and feel free if you want to kind of add on to this. But there are pieces back, and obviously you feel good about having a lead guard in Tristan Newton. You feel great about what Donovan Klingon can be. There are also a lot of questions here that I just have a hard time putting this team preseason top 10 and saying it's all going to come together. Could it? Sure. And they could be spectacular again. There's also a lot of things in this conference that if it doesn't go well and you don't find really 2 guys, now you're assuming Klingon is one of them, but 2 guys to anchor this team like Jordan Hawkins and Adama Sanogo did last season, and maybe that's Tristan Newton and Donovan Klingon, and then everybody kind of fills in from there. It is very, very interesting. And also just UConn's history after winning national championships, not great. Now, that is not the Danny Hurley era, obviously. Mm-hmm. But, right, this is just that weird team that they find ways to win national championships, and then usually they don't perform particularly well after that. Can they just find some consistency? And even if they aren't a top 10 team, be a top 25 team and make the Sweet 16 or something like that, where you just feel that there's some stability, because that's what generally Danny Hurley has been building. But now it's a completely different conversation because obviously you're the defending national champions.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. Storylines.
We're going to start with the same one from last season. That's the coaches.
Mm-hmm.
We did this last year and went, look at the names. Well, Rick Pitino, welcome back.
Mm-hmm.
Ed Cooley, welcome to Georgetown. And Kim English, welcome to Providence. Obviously this Rick Pitino thing, however you feel about him, it is fascinating. It is worthy of attention. It's going to be something to be aware of this season. He just, if anybody can turn around St. John's, it's probably him. Also, St. John's obviously has not exactly been in turnaround mode here, as coach after coach has tried and failed to get that program back to national prominence in the upper tier of the Big East. And, he basically removed most of his team. Just what is this going to be like with Rick Pitino back in the Big East? And then Ed Cooley. How does this go at Georgetown? I mean, we'll talk about this roster later. I think
will we talk about this roster later?
I have about 2 things to say about this roster later. Yeah.
I can't wait.
What does this look like? Is it just going to be weird, him patrolling the sidelines in the Big East, not at Providence? And then I'm really interested in Kim English, too. I think you and I both feel like Providence did about as good as they could have replacing Ed Cooley
Mm-hmm.
with Kim English. That if this works, he's there until one of the best programs in the country comes calling,
Mm-hmm.
and he's going to give you some of the energy and enthusiasm and just kind of hitting the reset button that is difficult to generate coming off of somebody like Ed Cooley, I feel like, because Ed Cooley did such a good job and was so closely associated with Providence. But
Mm-hmm.
if you've got to turn the page, Kim English is the kind of guy who says, I'll turn that page. I got no problem making this my own and setting my own standards and building my own culture and making it easier to move on from Ed Cooley. Because Kim English is just there to do his thing. He's incredibly confident in what he's doing. And obviously, he's had success, which is why at his age, he's getting this kind of opportunity. So maybe not the names as last season we were talking about, Sean Miller, Thad Matta, etc. But I am very, very interested in these coaches and the dynamics at play with the connections to the Big East and the addition of Kim English.
Yeah, I generally don't think that hiring an old coach to revive a program is a good idea. I generally am against that. That's why I thought Thad Matta at Butler was a weird hire. That's why I thought Tubby Smith at Memphis once upon a time was a weird hire. Like the names sound great, but do those guys actually want to put in the hours and the effort in your 25, 30 of their coaching careers to pull that program out of the mud? um maybe Ed Cooley wants to do that. We'll see, but does he actually pump any life into that program is my question going into this season. um does it actually matter that Ed Cooley is the head coach? Because it's not like Ed Cooley is a Hall of Fame type coach, but it's not like Ed Cooley was pumping out world beaters at Providence year after year after year, right? It's you had your Chris Dunn years, you had the last couple years in the Big East, but it's different than a guy who it's not a foregone conclusion that he's going to be able, at least in my opinion, that he's going to be able to attract the tippity top talent to Georgetown. And and I generally just think that the hole that program has dug itself is insurmountable for anybody quickly. And maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not totally sure that Ed Cooley actually moves the needle far enough into something that would be deemed success for Georgetown. Patino, like St. John's hasn't had an elite basketball coach since the guy that now the building they played in is named after. Like that's when you like the last guy to spend more than 6 seasons as the head coach of St. John's was the guy that they now play in the building named after him, Luke Arneseka.
That's a fun fact.
They haven't lost less than 10 games since the 1999-2000 season, which kind of goes in tandem with that. But regardless of how you feel about Rick Pitino, he is an elite basketball coach, and that's interesting. Until St. John's makes the tournament, they will never sniff my could make the NCAA tournament list. They didn't this year. Maybe Pitino changes that, but the coaching talent on the sidelines at St. John's has been so mid for so long that having a guy that when he's on the side, like he elevated that Iona program. He's one of the best coaches from a win percentage perspective, like ever, and that matters. We'll see how much. I'll sit and wait and see it matter before I predict it to matter. But yeah, Hall of Fame coaches being in new spots and one of them being in a new spot in the same conference as his old spot is all very intriguing. And you also alluded to it a little bit, but like the Big East coach roster is now features McDermott, Cooley, Smart, Patino, Miller, Hurley, Mata, Kim English. Like, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Now, a lot of those guys, Thad Mata coaches a just absolutely atrocious Butler basketball team right now. So, like, make of that what you will. But the roster is pretty impressive.
Sure is.
Of coaches. The other things I had in the storyline category is stuff that we've already talked about. Encore for Marquette. Is Kyle Neptune a good Big East basketball coach? I've got one other thing, but what else do you have in storylines?
So my second one is who makes up the second tier. This is what I had a really hard time with. Obviously, there are some teams you feel really good about. Creighton, Marquette, hypothetically Villanova, although we said that last season and it didn't come to fruition, and UConn. I put them in a category by themselves. They should be very good basketball teams. And then after that, you just start kind of looking here. And the next team for me would be Providence. You've got Bryce Hopkins and Devin Carter. That's a really good place to start. Kim English brings in some guys from George Mason, most notably Josh Oduro. Garway Duval is a top 50 prospect. There's some talent on that Providence team. Somebody's got to win basketball games. They're in now, of course, this is, Kim English's debut season. It's not like I'm throwing them in with the other 4 teams. But you got to feel pretty good there. And then you just kind of start looking. And Xavier lost an awful lot. Zach Fremantle is your the only one of your 5 leading scorers who's back. St. John's is basically an entirely new roster. DePaul.
And the rest of them suck.
Right. DePaul loses top 2 scorers. Okay, Georgetown's completely new roster. And you're talking Jaden Epps, Ismail Massoud, and Dontrez Styles. That doesn't particularly inspire you. That's really all I had to say about Georgetown. Seton Hall, okay. Alamir Dawes, Kaderi Richmond back. They were not a good offensive team, though. Did they, do they scare you? Butler's got a completely new team. Needed a talent upgrade. Not convinced they got it. I'm excited to see what Pierre Brooks can do. I know you're a big DJ Davis guy, Posh Alexander, but it's not like that's really catching the eye. And there's the rest of your conference. So to me, that's it. You would think that at least 5 teams are going to be in the NCAA tournament conversation. Probably at least 6. Whether 6 make it or not is a different story. But just who makes up the middle of this conference? Because there are a lot of question marks once you get past those first 4 or maybe 5 teams if you want to include Providence.
I don't want to include Providence, sir. Yeah, I'm not totally sure I want to include Villanova until they. Okay. And I'm not maybe I might. I'm not totally sure I want UConn in that top conversation either.
I think there's a tier 1A and a tier 1B. I would agree with that. Yeah.
I also don't think there could be a world where it's a top tier and a bottom tier, and that the middle tier is actually teams 3 and 4,
right?
And that there's But yeah, the bottom of this conference is falling out. Absolutely falling out.
Can you get the depth from somewhere, and if so, where?
Yeah. Butler's a train wreck. Every time I look on social media, I see that all of the players that left Butler look like the best player on the floor at their new schools. It's great. Jaden Taylor, best player on the floor at NC State. Chuck Harris, best player on the floor at SMU. Love it.
Yeah, and that's the other part. I mean, if there was one thing to feel good about with that Butler team, it was the backcourt, and the backcourt's gone. Yeah.
And Butler fans and their delusional, we can get somebody we were never going to get a player better than Chuck Harris on that basketball team this year. And everyone was convinced that Chuck Harris is, the 6th man on a good college basketball team. Whatever. Yeah, I have very little confidence in the teams outside the top 4 of the Big East this year. Very little. They'll probably get 5 in just because who else is going to get to the tournament?
Somebody's got to win these games.
68 teams have to play in the tournament, and there are, there are a certain number of wins that must be had by Big East teams this year for the conference schedule to be complete. So there will probably be 5, but the list is pretty slim pickings after the 4 teams that you really feel confident will make the tournament. Kind of in that same vein, this is the last thing I have. I'm really intrigued by this is mostly, I feel like a 2-horse kind of race, at least for me heading into the season, between Creighton and Marquette. I think UConn and Nova could be in the conversation. I also think that there's a world in which UConn is the best team in this conference. I think there's a world in which Villanova is the best team in this conference. And I'm not sure I can think of a time where I thought that there was a real possibility that 4 different teams could be the best team in this conference.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are 2 that are clearly that should be the center of the conversation for the best team in the conference heading into the year. But there are 4 teams that you could tell me were going to be the best team in this conference. And for whatever reason, the last 10 years of this version of the Big East, and most of the time that reason is Villanova. But it's either 2 teams or it's Villanova. That's usually the conversation we seem to be having. And as Villanova has turned over a new leaf in terms of era of their program, I think that brings more teams into conversation. And then you add the fact that UConn has done what you expected them to do in the Big East, which is ascend to the top of it. That the conversation is a lot more interesting than it used to be.
The other part of this is the balance between the conference regular season title and national championship aspirations. For that exact reason of there are 4 teams you can talk yourself into. I completely agree that going into March, you feel the best about in terms of going to win those 6 games and win a national championship. Whether any of them are actually among the favorites, we'll wait and see. But I'm right there with you that maybe Villanova takes a little while to get going with all the new pieces, but by the end you feel really good about it. And Marquette just never really clicks into another gear. And Creighton has a ceiling because of defensive liabilities or something.
Mm-hmm.
But also, again, UConn was not part of this title race last season. Did that change how we felt about UConn? No, not really. Right? Because you looked and you went, well, their ceiling is still as high as anybody in the country's if it all comes together, mm-hmm. and that's exactly what happened, and they steamrolled everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
that's
by February
part of
1, they were out of it, though.
Right, exactly.
That's interesting, yeah.
We went from they're the best team in the country to I don't really know what's happening. What in the world is going on? Why can't they beat a Big East team? To, oh, well, maybe they really were the best team in the country. So yeah. How does that – it could very well end up being something similar this season with the new players at Villanova, the fact that UConn's going to be reliant on some freshmen and some guys stepping into much bigger roles where Creighton has at least a foundation of players that have been there. Kalkbrenner, Shireman, Trey Alexander, even if there are some pieces that are gone. And obviously Marquette, it's basically the same group of players minus 1.
Yeah.
So how does that all kind of play out where, because you and I are both big on this, that it takes a different set of skills to win a regular season conference title than it does to win a national championship. And there might not be a better illustration of that than the Big East last season and this season.
I think you're right. What else do you have in storylines? I'm out.
My final one, and I talked about this a little bit, so I'll go quickly, is just the rebuilt rosters. It seems like there are so many, and I know this is just partially college basketball now, but even within that context, Xavier, you've got top 100 recruits coming in. I said Zach Freemantle is the only one of your top 5 scorers back. 3 productive mid-major transfers coming in. It's going to look very different. St. John's, Rick Pitino basically kicked everybody but Joel Soriano out. Jordan Dingle, Zuby Ejiofor. I really like Zuby Ejiofor and am excited to see what he can do in a new environment. Simeon Welcher, top 50 recruit. It's basically a completely new St. John's team. DePaul, basically a completely new team. Chico Carter Jr. was a starter for South Carolina last season. That's something, Georgetown, completely new team. Seton Hall, not so much. Butler, completely new team. UConn, lots of new pieces. Creighton, at least one important new piece in Stephen Ashworth. I'm just curious to see, because part of what we talked about last season was which of the transfers really elevate their programs.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, there's some of that, but then there's also just a lot of, because of the coaching changes, because of the turnover, there's just a lot of hodgepodge here of completely new collections of players. Does one of them click? And also Villanova has a very, very different roster. Does one of them click in a way that we don't expect it to? Going back to the kind of mid conference mush that we were talking about. Does one of these teams catch us by surprise?
Yeah. I like it. I think. Did anybody do it last year? Did anybody catch us by surprise with a completely new team?
Yeah, see, with that last part, I would probably say no.
Right, because of course Marquette did, but it wasn't. It wasn't in that same. I have no idea what this team is going to put on the floor because I've never seen this team before, and I don't know. I'd have to think about it longer about like what teams in the country would fit into that category. The point being that.
Oh, I have one.
Hit me.
I would say Pittsburgh.
Sure, I'm into that. That wasn't to say there weren't any. That's just to, or that I don't believe that a team that's completely new can surprise people. Because I suppose that's the only thing that, unless you're like Texas or something, where you just have you have all of the top transfers, so
Right.
of course you're going to be good.
I mean, maybe Xavier to a certain extent. Now, just how good they were with some new pieces coming in. It was a combination of new pieces and returners.
It probably would have been. You could probably just narrow that down to Sully Boom by himself.
Yeah, pretty much.
he was so good. But all that to say that generally, it is really hard to have no continuity and come in and surprise people, especially when the top of this conference, at least the tippity top of it, talking Marquette and Creighton, and UConn still has a substantial amount of important pieces coming back. But when Marquette and Creighton kind of retooling an already established core, or in Marquette's case, just having the same core pretty much, I suppose somebody is going to have to finish sixth. And I think maybe whoever finishes sixth, we're going to be kind of surprised that they finished sixth. It kind of feels like that. But if someone comes in with a completely new team and is really threatening to finish fourth in this conference, I think I'll be genuinely surprised by that.
Yeah.
How many teams can make the tournament?
This was such a difficult one to answer for me. I went with 8.
Okay.
Again, because I think 3 of them could be the 6th best team in the conference.
Sure. I also don't think that the 6th best team in this. I also don't think the 6th best team in this conference is going to make the tournament. If you finish 6th in this conference, you're not going to go to the tournament.
I would tend to agree with that. Yeah.
I've got 6.
Okay. Interesting.
Marquette, Creighton, UConn, Villanova, Xavier, Providence. That's my 6.
Okay. I have all 6 of those.
Okay.
And then I also threw in Seton Hall and St. John's.
Okay. Those would have been my guesses.
Seton Hall, like I said earlier, Alamir Dawes, Kadari Richmond, good place to start. You've got a very good defensive foundation. Shaheen Holloway, year 2. They got to be much better offensively, but maybe that happens in a conference that a lot of teams you're not feeling very good about. So I threw them in there, and then just Rick Pitino, some real talent, a lot of transfers, winnable games. Maybe it comes together immediately. I would not be surprised if St. John's finishes 5th or 6th and makes the big and is at least on the bubble, if not in the NCAA tournament. I know your stance is that you will not pick them until they actually do it.
That's correct.
I don't feel great about it. opening up the possibility that Rick Pitino finds a way with, because you can't look at the roster and say the roster is just simply not good enough, because I don't think that's true. Now, you could have said that about other rosters that didn't make the NCAA tournament as well. That's kind of been the story of St. John's as well. They look like the fourth best team in the Big East on paper, and they finished seventh, And then Xavier, I'm curious about how this ends up working. I really like Jerome Hunter. He and Desmond Cloud are going to have to be big-time contributors if this team is going to have success. On paper, not in love with it, but I didn't want to rule them out just because it's Sean Miller. It is Zach Fremantle. You've got some transfers coming in. You've got some pretty good, good recruiting class. I could see a world in which they finish 5th or 6th. I don't want to, especially with Sean Miller kind of being more of an underdog. That aspect is interesting to me, and I'm not going to count Sean Miller out. Whether this Xavier program can win a Big East regular season title with some of the struggles they seem to have when their favorites are in position to do that, different story. That's not what we're talking about this season, at least I don't think. So I threw them in the conversation.
This has been as close as I've come to picking the 5 teams that I think will make the tournament.
Yeah.
Not that could. Like, I think 5 teams will make the tournament, and I think it's pretty obvious which 5 teams would be the top 5 contenders for that spot.
Completely agree.
But I think 5 teams are going to make the tournament from this conference. And I think there are 6 teams that could finish in those top 5 spots.
I feel like Xavier has earned the right to just be included in that conversation.
I agree.
Yeah.
And Sean Miller's, his track record at Xavier has earned that more specifically, rather than Xavier, the program. Xavier plus Sean Miller.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Your winner.
Marquette. Again, maybe the ceiling is not the highest. Maybe they're not the ones that are going to go compete for a national championship, though I firmly believe they have a chance. To me, they A, know how to do this, B, have the continuity, and C, are the only team without real question marks for me. Now, you can argue Olivier Maxence Prosper is a question mark, but we talked about Villanova and UConn. I'm right there with you that they could win this conference, but I'm not considering them one of the 2 favorites. So inherently, they have question marks. So you're looking at Creighton as the other team. It seems to fit on paper. This is also a team that was inconsistent last season, that did not win the games they needed to be part of the title race. Maybe it doesn't work with Stephen Ashworth for whatever reason. Maybe they're not good enough defensively. There are just enough things that have to go right for Creighton to win a regular season conference title that I went with Marquette. I just believe in this group of players. The fact that last season ended the way it did gives me even more confidence that they are not satisfied. And I think Shaka has done a really good job of kind of keeping that chip on their shoulders and making sure that it's not just, we got here, look at what we did, but look how much farther we can go.
Sure.
So all of that, I went Marquette barely.
Do you know which year Creighton won the Big East?
The Zagorowski Ballack year?
The Zagorowski Alexander Ballack year. Yeah. I picked Creighton. I think it's very close. I picked Creighton because teams not named Villanova don't repeat as regular season champions, like, ever.
It's true.
And maybe that's a dumb reason to. I think it's hard, and as good and as well equipped as Shaka Smart is to keep the chip on your shoulder, it's just harder to keep the chip on your shoulder when you went 27-9 last year.
You know, I'm a big believer in that.
You are a massive believer in that. And of course, it's different than a team trying to repeat as a national champion and winning the Big East. Like, those are 2 different things. I'm not saying that they aren't, but I might even go all the way to betting on them sharing. Like, they just They both lose a game or two that they're not supposed to. They split the two games between each other, and they both go 15-5. Um, but I'll go with Creighton. I think they're going to be super duper fun. If I think they're the team in the conference that if they stumble into momentum, it's going to be really hard to stop their momentum. Like if it's a year where everyone's trying to grind out games, and I guess I'll put it this way. Marquette is going to be more well equipped, I think, to win the conference in a year if it's kind of a like a pitcher's duel.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're trying to keep up with Creighton and they're shooting the lights out in Big East play, that it's going to be hard for anyone to keep up with them. But I think it's going to be very close. If one of them wins it outright, it's going to be by as close of a margin as it can be, I believe.
And the other part of it is, even if Creighton or Marquette don't live up to that for some reason, it's entirely possible that UConn or Villanova do.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because of those four teams up at the top. I just find it hard to believe that somebody is going to run away with this.
I would agree. I don't think that's going to happen. But if a team is, I think that Creighton is the team best equipped to like win this thing going away.
Completely agree. Marquette is going to win somewhere between 13 and 16
sure.
games.
Yeah. I'd probably set the over under 15.5.
Yeah.
Maybe 14.5, but probably 15.5.
Creighton after last year. It could be more like 12 and it could be 18.
There you go. You got anything else on the Big East?
Not too much. I mean, we touched on everybody already. Just want to talk about Georgetown, I guess, for a second. It would have been really interesting had Hunter Dickinson chosen to go home. Because then you're talking about a nice foundation of new players that actually might be NCAA tournament caliber. Without him, though, I just don't see enough there. And I'm bringing this up just because one of the conversations we had about Ed Cooley when he took this job was, it's not like you need 4 years to turn this thing around. If you get enough people excited, you can build an NCAA tournament team next season because, right, basically just rebuilding the roster from scratch. And that was one of the big off-season storylines for me in this conference, is just how much better can Georgetown get from a talent perspective. And yes, they got some nice transfers. Jaden Epps. I really like Ish Masood. He clearly wanted to be a bigger part, and he's going to get that opportunity. Whether you want Ish Masood as one of your 3 most important players when you're trying to make the NCAA tournament, different question. But to me, they needed the home run that really kind of raises the bar and goes, oh, that's your guy that's going to be able to lead you to the NCAA tournament. And I don't see that player on their roster.
I mean, not that Hunter Dickinson was able to do it last year in Michigan either.
Yes. That is a fair point.
That's my hot take. Is that teams that Hunter Dickinson gets more important on get worse. But that's okay. We don't have to. We can save that for the Big 12. I have no idea what's going on in the Big 12 yet, so I can't comment on what that actually means. But that's my. Anyways, anything else?
Did you see what James Harden said?
Oh, his like Daryl Morey's a liar thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fun times.
Yeah. It's okay. James Harden is going to have a career that like people remember in YouTube highlights only. So whatever. He can be upset. Like I don't understand. Like he could have just opted out. Like this is what I don't understand. Like you created this possibility by opting in. Somebody was going to pay you whatever you wanted. It was gonna happen. But now you've created this situation where you have to be traded and the market just doesn't exist.
And they took
People
him
will,
off the trade block.
like,
That's what I. It just perfectly sums it up, right? The past
and you knew
70
Morey was going to do that. Morey doesn't trade stars for not stars. He doesn't do it.
right. The 72 hours of James Harden they're no longer, kind of open to the idea of trading him to James Harden calling Daryl Morey a liar. Oh boy. It's gonna be a fun couple months.
And that's fun because it suggests that James Harden has a say in the matter. That he would know if Daryl Morey, like, actually Daryl Morey really does want to trade me, but he's going to tell everybody that he doesn't, so nobody calls.
I don't want to think any more about this.
Yeah.
We shall see.
James Harden might be at the top of my, like, relative to how other people feel about James Harden. Like, not in a million years is he on my basketball team. Not in a million. Not in a million. I get to take Ish Smith or James Harden. Ish, welcome to the team. That was a massive ricochet, Ish Smith. But I can't stand him. I can't stand him. He's the only player in NBA history to request a trade 3 times.
I feel like that record's going to get broken in the pretty near future, though.
Maybe. But, like, he might do it a 4th time.
I mean,
like, where he goes
didn't
next.
Kyrie? Isn't Kyrie on 3? Or is he on 2?
I think he's on 2.
2, okay. So, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Celtics and then Nets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I bet you Kyrie ties that record by the time he retires.
His way. He's on his way. All right. We'll be back next week, part 3 of season previews, college basketball 2023-24. We're what, 2.5 months away? Right? Early November, 2.5 months away. We're getting there. All righty. Please subscribe to the Jays for Days podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at Jays for Days Pod. We'll be back next week. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. And we will see you